The second part of the sustainable solution is the fiscal reform. Narrowing the deficit, which is sometimes explained as austerity, I call it as healing. We don't need to just cut expenditures on a flat basis. We just need to admit that on the expenditure side, the pension and social system that we inherited from the Bismarck time is outdated, and we will not be able to sustain it, especially if we want to compete not only against Americans, Russians, against Asians, who face different set of payroll taxes, different set of tax burden. Fiscal healing, bringing the budgets into the balance, is the second most important solution. It's not important because of some external requirements. It's important because of the size of our debt and because of the prerequisite number one. If we want to convince the global investors, the global central banks, that we are a credible club, we must simply bring our house into order, which means balancing our budget eventually. And now the third out of the fourth part solution, the structural reforms. A good question that was asked by Ms. Gubkova today was what to do with the unemployment of the youth. Well, that's a good example of where structural reforms, just changing the way we do things, can make a difference. Peripheral economies, those unfavorable big countries, have one thing, especially in the south, have one thing in common. For example, extremely protective labor code and extremely unflexible labor market. Go and try to study about the labor code and labor market in Spain, which has extremely prohibitive labor code, which the flip side of that of a rigid labor market is that employers are reluctant to hire new employees, especially the young ones, and therefore the young people in Spain usually tend to be rolled over on temporary contracts, which doesn't really make a good start of your career, or does it? This is, again, just one of the examples of the structural reforms. The heart of those structural reforms definitely must be more flexible market and strengthening the entrepreneurial spirit. This part of the solution is not the reaction to the debt crisis. The fiscal consolidation, that's an answer to the crisis that was breeding for 2 decades. Structural reforms to strengthen the entrepreneurial investors' climate, to make the European market more flexible, is an answer to the crisis which was here even before 2008. Just try to recall over the past 2 decades how many of the groundbreaking inventions, including the products that everybody here is using, came or were invented in Europe. Structural reforms, increasing entrepreneurial spirit, making the market, including the labor market in Europe, more flexible. These are some of the examples of the structural changes that are inevitable. Why? Without structural changes, we cannot hope for revival of growth. And why do we need to care? We do need to care about GDP. We do need to care about the growth of economy. Not only because of new jobs, but also because of our old debts. How can we get rid of the old debts unless, as I said, we cannot restructure them, we cannot abolish them. We can get rid of them only by growing out, only by creating entrepreneurial environment, investors environment that will support faster growth and that will enable us to grow out of our debt the same way as Ireland or United States did after the World War II. And just one last remark to those more senior of us who might perceive the word reform with a bit of an aversion. Another reform, another change. Why change? Why does everybody require us to change? Reform is just a different word for a change. And to that, I would like to close my brief contribution with a quote from my Chinese friend when I asked him about how do his parents and his grandparents accept the extreme change that the country went through in just 2 decades. And my Chinese friend told me, the day without a change is the day when you are dead. Thank you for your attention.